All right. Looking at Mark again, what do we have as structure? What's the structure of Mark?
Oh, you mean that he tells us what Jesus is?
Tells us what Jesus is, using two titles. And that's what they are. They're titles. And since Patty hasn't been here for a while, when I ask a question, because we're reviewing, because I always review. When I ask a question, y'all will know the answer. Just look at her and then do this. You know, to make her feel comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, just look at her and do this.
Oh, that'll be so. Patty could know.
She could know the answer.
Don't count on it. Don't count. I got your back. I forget everything.
That's good. Anyway, so we've got two titles, and the two titles are
The Son of God.
that's one.
Christ.
And Christ. We got Christ and we got Son of God as the two titles.
See, Patty did know.
So Patty did know the answer.
I looked back.
I looked it up. That's right. 'Cause most of the answers are in there. I can tell you that. So we got those two titles, and this gives us a structure of Mark's gospel. And we're going to see in what we look at today, and we're kind of finishing a major section in Mark today. You know, he's a writer, and so what he writes is structured. He's a good writer. So what he does is really highly structured. And you good writers, maybe not great writers, but good writers are really structured, because the goal is to have the people who are reading or hearing understand. You know, understand what they're saying. Now, I think I'm a fairly good preacher. I think I'm fairly good. I'm not a great preacher, but I think I'm fairly good. But one of the things I do, and I really focus on it, is I want you to take it away, take something away. Therefore, I will always say first, second, third, or fourth, or first. It's always really structured, because I think that's easier as an old teacher. That's easier to learn than this beautiful narrative that may be magnificent, but may not be really is easy to understand. That's a great preacher and a great writer can do that and still have people take away the information. I ain't great, so good is good enough. So you structure, and that's what Mark is doing. Mark is very structured in how he presents the gospel of Jesus. And we want to appreciate that. If we don't see it or don't kind of focus on it, then we miss one of the techniques I think Mark is using to make it easier for us to understand. So we can anticipate what he does by looking at what he's done, because he tends to follow structures. Okay, and this is an example of the structure. We got a two-part gospel. One part about Christ, and as we looked at the Christ, we found out that Jesus can do what as the Christ?
Miracles.
He can do miracles. Yes, Barb isn't here. What's the word? Authority. Thank you, Donna. Jesus has authority, and he shows that authority by miracles. He shows that authority by casting out demons. He shows that authority by feeding people. 5,000, 4,000, different meanings. Calming the sea, water, symbol of chaos. He calms the sea to the point where he can walk on it. So he has all this authority. He can cleanse the unclean. All of them demonstrating his authority, because that seems to be what Mark sees as the Christ. Now, if you looked at Matthew, Luke, or John, they may see the Christ in slightly different ways. That's okay. They're different people. So how they define him as Christ may be slightly different than Mark. Mark seems to focus on this authority that he shows. And we know he finishes that first section when
Peter
says, he says, "Who do you say that I am?" And he says, "You are the Christ." So Mark evidently has done everything he needs to do to lead Peter to the point where he can say, "You are the Christ." Okay? So, part one done with that confession. The other gospel writers aren't doing that. So when the confession is made, it's different in the different gospels, because they aren't working with the same structure Mark is using. Okay, and so as soon as he does that, whole gospel changes, doesn't it? And what does he start talking about? He starts talking about the Son of Man, uses a title he's never used before. Jesus never calls himself Son of Man until we get into chapter 8. the end of chapter 8. Now he says Son of Man. And that's the title he starts using for himself. And that the Son of Man is going to do what? Suffer. The Son of Man is going to be rejected, and the Son of Man is going to suffer, and the Son of Man is going to rise. Now he can't say Son of God, because we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Because he's ultimately going to be shown. But we're in the second part, the second title. He's done the Christ. Now he's talking about Son of God. He's finished with that. When what happened? How do we know we're at the end of that section of Mark?
Which section are you at?
The second part, the Son of God section.
Centurion
When the centurion at the cross looks at it and says, Mark says, he saw how he died and said, truly, he is the Son of God. And boom, Mark has finished the second part of his gospel. He has done what is necessary to understand Jesus as Son of God. Now, also remember that Mark is not writing to the disciples. He is not writing to the disciples. He's writing
to his church.
Yes, he's writing to his
people
church.
in his church.
And he's writing, and his people in the church are living in a very specific place, at a very specific time, facing very specific issues. And we can kind of get inferences of that by what Mark emphasizes. But Luke is writing to a very specific church in a very specific time with very specific issues. That's why when we read the letters of Paul, the letters of Paul are different, because he's writing to same thing. Different churches, different times, different issues. And so that's what the evangelists are doing too. And we want to be aware of that. So that's why they're not going to be identical, because they're not going to identical people.
If they would have all been identical, there'd only be one church.
There'd only be one church. There'd only be one gospel. And the what would make it tricky is that
How can you believe it? If you all have the same story, you never tell the same story the same.
We've talked about little things, like when they dropped the paralytic, through the roof. And in Mark, it says they dug a hole and dropped. And this is small potatoes. Dug a hole and dropped him. Which means whoever is reading that believes that roofs are made of thatch. And therefore you dig holes in the roof because it's thatched. In Luke it said they removed tiles and dropped the man. Well, that's a small thing, and nobody's going to get bent out of shape about that. But Luke is writing to people who have tile roofs. And if he had said dug a hole, that would have been confusing to him. Because that's not what you do with a roof. You don't dig holes. If Mark he had said dug a hole or removed tiles, they'd have been confused because their roofs don't have tiles. So, is this something special? Should we be building houses with tiles? No, of course not. It's writing to different people in a different situation. So, and with different goals, and that becomes important too. All right, so we're in this section about Son of God. Now, last thing, just so that we're all on the same page, we got groups, because all these groups that we've encountered, they're still developing. Well, one group is kind of already developed. They're consistent. We already know about them. The other ones we're not as sure of. You got Jesus that is the protagonist of this. He's the hero of this piece. Okay, but then we've got three groups. We've got other characters. Then we'll see another one today. That we've run across. The rich young ruler last week, the Syrophoenician woman, we've run in to people along the way. But there seem to be three big groups. Jesus is here, and then we have these three groups. And who are the three groups?
Disciples, the crowd, and the Pharisees.
You got the disciples, you got the crowds, and then you have the Pharisees and the scribes. And with the group that has already been defined as who? Man, we know them.
The Pharisees and the scribes.
The Pharisees and the scribes, we know them. And whenever we see mention of Pharisees and scribes,
boo.
We boo. That's what we do. We boo. We take popcorn and throw it at the screen because we know they're bad. Now, again, as you look at the different things, you don't have a Nicodemus in Mark. Where the Pharisee when we looked at Nicodemus, throughout the gospel, in the three places he's mentioned, comes to greater awareness until at the end, he's helping with the burial. So you have, Nicodemus, a Pharisee that grows. I mean, you don't have any Pharisees that's growing in Mark. Pharisees are bad. And again, as a writer, he wants his reader not to have to think, is that a good one or is that a bad one? Does he understand? Mark doesn't want us to waste time thinking about it. If it's a Pharisee, he's bad. He is bad. He's bad news. Because he wants to do what? Kill Jesus. And why does he want to kill Jesus?
Immediately.
He wants to
because he did good on the Sabbath.
What's that?
He did good on the Sabbath.
He did good on the Sabbath. So for the worst possible reason they want to kill him, because he did good. So the Pharisees, but thank you for immediately. I really appreciate it. But so we got Pharisees over there. They're always bad. And every time we see them, they're going to be bad. Now we got these other two groups. And we got the disciples / apostles. And for Mark, that group seems to kind of blend together. Apostles are sometimes 12, but sometimes he calls them disciples. So, it's kind of a fluid group. Luke doesn't have it. It's far more definite in Luke. But it's kind of a fluid group. And what is our impression of the disciples, apostles?
They don't get it.
They don't get it. They don't, and that's become particularly true since what point? What point have we started to get the idea that these guys, they're not getting it?
The suffering Jesus.
Yeah, when he starts talking about suffering, man, they seem to be going down. Now, we've had allusions to it in the first part. Because instead of when Jesus walks on water, they're afraid. They don't, and he says to them, why don't you have faith? Lack of faith. So they're not, and they're afraid to ask him stuff. So but they've been better in that first part. Now, they aren't doing real well. We have a lot of questions. In fact, we've run into two places where they've really dropped the ball.
Isn't it easier for us to accept that Jesus is the Christ than the Son of God?
Absolutely. And I that's what makes one of the things that I love so much about Mark. And maybe because Mark is really structured, and that's kind of what I do when I try to do. I love it so much with Mark, because I think Mark would say, yeah, you got it. Boom, you got it. That's the problem. They love the good news. They love news they consider good, but they miss the whole good news, because the rest of the good news is suffering and death, and they can't get their heads around that, and that causes problems for them. But the disciples, and that's why they start sliding a little bit. So the disciples have been with Jesus. He called them. They responded
Immediately.
good, and so everything has been great. But now, and we saw twice in the last few weeks that the disciples really seem to have fallen off. And what was it what are some of the examples in the last couple of weeks where the disciples have not proven good at all? This is worse than, I'm not going to ask him because I'm kind of afraid of what he'll say. But they are out now wrong.
Telling Jesus that he can't do what he was going to do.
Yeah, rebuking Jesus for crying out loud. Man, a disciple doesn't rebuke, and Jesus says,
Get behind.
yeah, your role is behind me. And your role isn't in my face, it's behind me. And we're going to see that kind of alluded to in what we saw, look at this week. What else did we see last week that shows that these guys is a little worse than not getting it?
They were keeping people from Jesus.
And in particular, who were they keeping from Jesus? They're keeping children from Jesus. And we already...
Sick children.
What's that?
Sick children.
Sick children. They're pushing them away. Man, that is bad. That's kind of like with the Pharisees. When they get mad at Jesus for healing, doing good on the Sabbath. Man, they're pushing sick children away from Jesus.
Jesus invited them in.
Yeah, and the disciples... They were trying to push him away. Gosh, that's not good. What else did they do? Remember they were having an argument among themselves?
Who's going
to be the greatest? Which one is the most important? Really? Really? These are followers of Jesus and they're debating among themselves who's going to be the greatest? Really? These guys are the best Jesus could come up with? All the people around, these are the 12 he chose? Whoa. They seem to be like the Arizona Cardinals.
What's What's an Arizona Cardinal?
You don't follow a lot of football, I'm guessing. The Arizona Cardinals started really, really good. And then, after the midpoint of the season, they didn't do so well. They didn't do so well, and it's a question whether...
I'm sure the Kenyans needed to know that. They
Well,
don't know about Arizona Cardinals.
So I appreciate. See, I appreciate the fact that you feigned a lack of knowledge in order to help the Kenyans. Because you knew all about the car. Oh, okay. But I mean, that's kind of what's happening to the disciples. They're kind of going down. You look at it, they're kind of going downhill a little bit.
Do you think that's because as the Christ, they saw him as the leader and then they were going to be with him?
Of course.
But as the Son of Man, they didn't want any
No,
part of this.
of course. I think that is exactly what Mark is saying. That it is all well and good when you're getting free fish sandwiches. That's great. But as soon as you have to be last to be first,
Well, I think there's something here too with the fact that being the Christ is a physical thing, as they see it.
Sure.
To be the Son of God is a spiritual revelation, and God wasn't putting out the Spirit yet. It wasn't until after he, is risen from the dead on Pentecost that they received the Holy Spirit. And then they can understand.
Right. Well, and what you're saying is that's Luke. That's what Luke is going to say.
Yeah.
That is, and John's going to say the same thing. And Luke and John, because they both have the Spirit coming. That's what they're going to say. They can't do it. That's why in the story of Thomas in the 20th chapter of John is so important. The Thomas doesn't know who. They say we found the Christ, and he said, "Well, I won't believe until I see the holes in his hands." And he gets a bad rap for that, but it's undeserved because they received the Spirit. He didn't, because he wasn't there. In fact, what was amazing is he ended up believing without any mention of receiving the Spirit, which is, kind of exciting, and he makes the most profound statement. But you're right. That is exactly what John and Luke will say. They can't do it until they get the Spirit. The Spirit really doesn't play much role in Mark, which is kind of interesting. Or in Matthew. Matthew and Mark, the Spirit is not a very important, doesn't play the role it plays in John and in Luke. It's a big deal. It's a big deal in John.
Defend them a little bit.
Yeah, well, but I know.
They don't have the ability.
Yeah, but see, I think that's really important because what I think Mark does, because all of these evangelists are working on an agenda. They are working on an agenda. And I think part of Mark's agenda, what truth does he want to convey? Is don't look at these disciples as heroes. Don't look at them as heroes. Because, and this is I think Mark's thinking. This isn't Luke's thinking. So it's not, you can't say, this is what the Bible teaches. This is what Mark is saying. Don't look at them as heroes. Because these guys are actually worse than you right now. Because they failed Jesus in ways you wouldn't fail him. Telling his church later. You wouldn't do what Judas did, would you, Patty?
No.
No, of course not. Van, you wouldn't do what Peter did. No, of course not. We wouldn't run away when times got tough. We wouldn't do it. But you know what? That's what the 12 did. So don't look at them and say, ooh, if I'd only been with them. Or what did they say later? Or where were they buried? Because I want to go to their graves and I want to find writings that they left. Because these were great men. Mark is saying, don't do that. You were in better shape than they are. You are better people in your little bitty struggling church than these guys. Focus on what? Jesus. Don't focus on Peter. Don't focus on John. Don't focus on James. Focus on Jesus. Focus on God, because he's the one that's important. Now, again, Luke's going to do it different, which is okay. His perspective is different. So it's not like one size fits all. But I think, that's interesting you said that, because Luke, I don't think Mark is going to defend any of them. And in fact, of all of them, Mark is the one that holds them to the most scrutiny. The others kind of give that out, but Mark doesn't do it. And I think because Mark wants to convey something different. Might have been because of his church. Might have been, maybe in his church there was this little little cult within the Christian church that started to sort of revere Peter.
Kind of like Paul had, one was Apollos, one was...
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Maybe there was a little cult that was developing around Peter, and Mark wants to nip that in the bud. You can't do that. You can't worship these guys. You gotta worship Jesus, and you need to do what Jesus did because they didn't. You need to do what he did. Okay, so we've got all of this going on. Now we're at with the crowd. And what about the crowd? What do we got with the crowd?
We don't know.
We don't know. We don't know. We still don't know. Last time you were here, we didn't know about the crowd. We still don't know. They're always in the background. They're always showing up. They don't seem to have strong opinions. Okay. All right, and even in the story, people don't know about the crowd. Because later we're going to find out that the scribes and Pharisees are scared of the crowd. Because they think the crowd is pro-Jesus. But we will find out the crowd is not pro-Jesus at all. So anyway, that's where we are. Now, what we've been looking at, how he has related, how he's proclaiming the Son of God. We're going to finish, and start something new next week. Still in the second part, but we're going to finish up something that he began, at the end of the 8th chapter. Right here. Now, when we look at verse 32 of chapter 10, where is he? What does Mark tell us?
He's headed to Jerusalem.
Remember, we said that last week. Remember how the passage started last week? He was going through Galilee. What is Mark? And gosh, I love Mark. Luke does the same thing, though. What is he doing? What is Mark, in terms of structure, what is he doing?
He's leading us where he wants us to go.
He's leading us, literally. Because Jesus is moving through Galilee and moving to Jerusalem. And what do we, because everybody reading this already knows the basic story. So we know what's going to happen to Jesus. What's going to happen to Jesus?
He's going to be betrayed.
He's going to be betrayed. He's going to be crucified, and he's going to be resurrected. And where is that going to happen?
In
Jerusalem. So we know that. So as he drops in, going to Galilee, now he's heading to Jerusalem, the reader, know that the story is coming to its climax. We're getting to the climax of the story because that's going to happen in Jerusalem, but we're not there yet because he hasn't gotten there. It's just a trip along the way. Mark is just giving us these little road marks, to sort of split his gospels, separate what came before from what's going to come after. So he's on his way to Jerusalem. Where is Jesus? Where is Jesus on the way to Jerusalem?
In front.
He's in front, which means the disciples are following, which is very appropriate. And we'd say, isn't that good? The disciples are following just the way disciples are supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
But then Mark tells us what?
They were afraid.
Yeah, they were both amazed and afraid. So, it's good that they're amazed, but the word fear here is not a good one. So it's not, these followers are,
It's
again,
really just the 12 that's
yes, it's disciples. Right, it's the disciples. Okay, now he takes the 12 aside, right? Now, as soon as he takes the 12 aside, we, the reader, know what's he about to do because he's done this over and over again in Mark. When you take the 12 aside, what is he going to do for them?
He's going to tell them something he wants them to know.
He's going to tell them something he really wants apostles, those who are sent out, and that's what apostle means, to know. Now, as the reader, when he does that, what do we know?
We know too.
Yeah, he's about to speak to us. So what Mark is about to write is to us, because we would identify with the disciples, particularly with the 12. Not the crowds, not the Pharisees, but we would identify. So when he gives them that special lesson, we kind of perk up because the lesson is going to be for us. And what does he start telling them?
They're going to Jerusalem.
Okay, going to Jerusalem. And what's going to happen in Jerusalem?
It's going to be betrayed.
Okay. Have we heard this before? Yes, we've heard this before. How many times have we heard this before?
2.
Twice, which means this is the third time. Woo! What did we say about numbers?
Really good.
Really important. Mark has 3s everywhere. And this is another 3. I think you can divide this section from the end of chapter 8 to the end of chapter 10, you can divide it into 3 parts. Each part has certain things in common. One, a marker, location marker, Caesarea Philippi, going through Galilee, going to Jerusalem, boom, boom, boom. Each of them has Jesus saying, I'm going to suffer and die. Boom, boom, boom. Each of the sections begins the exact same way. Now, if that's true, what do we expect to follow this? I mean, if this is a pattern.
A gar?
Well, we're going to find a gar. Thank you. I have accomplished something. We have gars out there. Yes. What else are we going to expect to happen? I mean, in terms of general structure, what has twice before has happened every time he said to the disciples, they're going to do something boneheaded. They're going to be a bunch of boneheads. Because each time he has done this, they've done something stupid. And I say stupid because I think Mark wants the reader to say, good night, what are they doing? What are they thinking? I think that's how he wants us to respond. Each time that's happened before, they've done something stupid. Peter rebuking Jesus, arguing among themselves who's greatest. We haven't seen the boneheaded thing yet, but we can be pretty sure if Mark has a pattern, it's coming. Okay? Now, looking at what he says, though, do you remember what he had said before? This was a little different than what he had said before. Well, I'll tell you just for the sake of time, this is more detailed. Yeah. He hadn't mentioned flogging before. So this becomes a little more detailed. Now, why might Mark, the writer, make this one a little more detailed?
Because it's the last time he's going to tell you everything now.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. I think this is the last time he's going to say it. The next time it's going to happen. So general, more specific, very more specific. And then it's going to happen. Again, Mark is a writer. And he's leading us. Just like a good writer, he's leading us to Jerusalem. That's what he's doing. He's leading us to Jerusalem. So this is a little more detailed if you compare what he said in other places. Okay, so now, you've already told me, if Mark follows a pattern, which I believe he is, of all the gospel writers, the most structured, the disciples are going to do something stupid, right? What starts to happen in verse 35?
They start arguing over who's going to be on his left and right.
Well, who?
James and John.
Okay, James and John. Okay, James and John, the sons of Zebedee. Now, why do you think Mark would say the sons of Zebedee? Why would he mention? Yeah, sons of Zebedee. He wants us to remember that these are the first, two of the first 4 he called. So James and John are there. And I love the way he writes it. They step forward to talk to him, right? Okay.
And they call him teacher.
Yeah, they call him teacher. Now, as soon as we hear teacher, we think teacher's fine, but it's not a title that shows understanding. They really don't understand. That's not an understanding. The scribes and the Pharisees call him teacher. So is that not a big deal? And his worst enemies call him teacher. So calling him teacher doesn't cause you to feel warm and fuzzy inside. So they call him teacher. Disciples, James and John should know better. They've been around him longer than just call him. But that's what Mark, I think, is kind of undermining them. And they go and Jesus responds. What does Jesus? They come up to him. What does Jesus say?
What do you want?
What do you want me to do for you? Okay. And what do they say to Jesus? Oh, I love it. Jesus, sort of like when you go after, would you do me a favor? Would you do me a favor?
What is it? First?
Yeah, what is it? What do you want me to do? And they say, well, they're a piece of work.
And just following the part about servants, this just makes no sense at all how they could even ask it. We spent that second section, because I think each of those 3 sections has like a different theme.
The first one has to do with following, the second one has to do with service. And he's just spent all this stuff of talking about service and the importance of the lowly. And that the upper is, the rich young ruler, that's not what you look for. You look for those who are low, like children and stuff. He's already done that. And what do these bozos do? I want to be on your right, one of us. And to be fair, it doesn't matter which one of us. Just one of us. My brother can be on your right. That's okay. As long as I'm on your left.
Don't leave me out.
Now, it's interesting, and Ed, it kind of goes to what you were saying. This same story is in the Gospel of Matthew. But Matthew, what's that?
The mother.
Yes.
Yeah.
In Matthew, the mother asks the question.
Yeah.
And why would Matthew have the mother ask the question?
Because he's giving the disciples a better picture.
Yes. It's not James and John that asked the question. It was their mother. So I'm going to protect them a little bit. Mark does not have any interest in protecting James and John. They're the ones that come up to him and say, and even make it work when you come in your
Kingdom.
in your glory. In your glory, can one of us sit on your right, one of us on the left? Now, sitting on the right and left means what? What would it? What? It's a position of power, right? And what would that mean about James and John?
They were going to be ahead of the other apostles.
Power hungry.
They are going to be the boss. Mm-hmm. Jesus will be the top boss, but they'll be second in command.
Just like Joseph.
Yes, they are going to be
Or Daniel.
second, not first. But they're going to be second. First among
But it's ahead of all the others.
Ahead of all the others. Okay. Now the fact that they say to him, when you come in your glory, kind of infers that they are looking for Jesus' glory. But when you look at what they ask, talking about glory is kind of ironic. Because what's the irony of them saying to Jesus, I want to be on your right side and my brother on your left when you come in your glory? Why does that use become a little bit ironic?
Because they're still thinking back in a physical kingdom that he's going
Okay.
to set up rather than, the spiritual kingdom that will come when he reaches his glory.
What is going to be for at this point in the story? When is Jesus going to be glorified? When is Jesus going to attain glory? In what Mark is presenting for us. That makes their request so ironic. But Jesus' response will make sense. When is he going to be glorified?
At his death.
He's going to be glorified on the cross. And when they say, when you come in your glory, they're not thinking glory as dying on a cross. They're thinking of glory as, head of an army, angels, coming, taking over, throwing out the Romans, establishing, giving everybody free fish and bread. Oh, this will be great. That's what they're thinking. And it's kind of ironic because Jesus' glory is going to be shown through suffering. It's also kind of interesting that they talk about in when you come in your glory, because they're really not focused on the glory of Jesus. They're focused on whose glory?
Their own.
Their own. They're focused on their own glory. They aren't focused on him. So again, good writer, he throws that glory in, and we the reader say, they're not thinking about Jesus' glory. They're thinking about themselves. They're thinking about themselves. And I think we should be. And I'll tell you, I think that's exactly what Mark wants us to feel. We're looking at these guys that we may have heard stories about forever. And we're thinking, Lord have mercy. I always saw James and John, geez, they were pillars of the church. They were these great men. What? What?
Transformation.
Yeah. This is, these were not great men. Anyway, they say that, and what does Jesus say? How does he respond?
You don't know what you're asking.
You don't know what you're asking. And then he says what?
Can you drink?
Are you willing Are you willing to drink from the cup that I'll drink and be the baptism with which I'll be baptized? Now, we, the reader, know. What is he talking about?
His death.
He's talking about his death. He's talking about his death. Do you think James and John know what he's talking about? No. Not a clue, because they say, yeah, we'll do that. Because what they're thinking is, baptism. I can be baptized if I get to be on the right and left. Yeah, I can do it.
Power.
Yeah, boy, I'm good. So, yeah, we're able. And then what does Jesus say?
It's not up to him.
You know something? And before he even says that, you're right. But before he says that, what does he say? Because they volunteered. They said, count me in. We're able. What does he say?
You are going to.
Yeah, you are going to. You have no idea what you're volunteering for.
Well,
But you're right.
they said, in the beginning, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. Well, they were dumb enough to ask for that cup.
Do they have any idea what he suggested? They don't, but who does? Who does know what he's getting at? We do. The reader knows. The reader knows. We know what he's talking about. And they are going to suffer and die. These guys are going to suffer and die, but then he doesn't know that. And then he says what?
It isn't his place.
It's not his place. It's not his place to determine who's on the right and who's on the left.
It depends on who God has prepared
That's
for that
right.
position.
It is God. And we've already got an idea. Because he's already said, what about being first?
The ones that are last.
The ones that are last. So you want to know who's going to be first? Look at the guy at the end of the line. Don't look at the guy at the
But
beginning.
we also saw Moses and Elijah. I think
Yeah.
they're going to be pretty high up if they were sharp.
Although they faded. And Jesus was alone on the mountain at the end. Could be. Don't know. But and Jesus will, and that's one of the things in Mark, Jesus is going to be very careful. He's not going to talk a lot about what God will do. Because he'll say, I don't know. I don't know the day and the hour. I don't know. So he's going to be really, he's not going to take that. And again, in Mark it makes sense. Because in Mark, Jesus becomes this Son of Man. He becomes this person who suffers. He doesn't become a God-man walking around. He becomes the Son of Man. And that's really, I think, important in Mark. John's a little different. John's just different. But in Mark, Jesus can't infer that he has all kinds of secret knowledge about this. He's almost prophetic in his knowledge, but it's not, like inside secrets. And certainly he doesn't have, we'll see at the end, he's not at all sure about what's going to happen in the end of the story. He seems to have some doubts at the end, which is important, again, for us.
When Christ returns, he's going to marry his bride. And in the Jewish tradition, the son doesn't determine when he gets married. He gets engaged. It's the father that says, okay, everything's ready. We've got the room built for you. We've done everything. Now is the time. Go get your bride.
Mm-hmm.
So Christ would know the hour of his bride.
Marriage.
The marriage.
He just doesn't know. Which is interesting you did that, because it was Debbie's father that told me I had to get married. But that's neither here nor there.
That didn't sound
I don't want to.
nice.
I'd rather not go into it. Yeah, I don't want to go into it. It took a long time to heal. I'll tell you. If anybody says rock salt under the skin is easy, to deal with, they
I
are
was
wrong.
concerned about the shotgun.
They are wrong.
I was concerned about the shotguns.
I don't want to talk. I'm not talking from any personal experience, but I'll tell you, it's really painful. But from what I hear, anyway, he says.
So bad.
And what then does he say to them? Because they're angry, right? The other ones are angry. And he says to them, oh, okay, guys, because you're angry at James and John, and they should be. James and John are jerks. But then they shouldn't be angry, because they're angry because
They didn't think of
They didn't think of it first because they would have asked first. And,
Shotgun.
that's exactly right. And so what does Jesus say? Like, none of them understood what Jesus was getting at before. Because if they had understood, the other guys shouldn't have been angry. They should have been happy because Jesus was ensuring that they were not going to be first, right? And Jesus says the first will be last and the last will be first. But clearly they don't understand that because they're all scrambling to what? To be first. To be first. So anyway, so what does he say to them?
We don't do it the same way as the world does.
We don't do it the same way as the world. Because what do you do in the world?
The leaders get all the glory and don't do much work.
The leaders get the glory and the followers do the work. But that's not the kingdom of God. That's not the kingdom of God. Because again, people don't come to be served. My followers don't come to be served. They come to serve. And that's your role. Now, this is a fine thing to those disciples. It is a really good thing for the church later. For Mark's church to hear this, what Jesus says. That you are not a part of this world. Therefore, don't sweat out the fact that you're a little bitty and struggling. Don't stress out. Because it's the world that is concerned about numbers and power and wealth and size. That's a world that does that. That's not you. You're here to do what?
Serve.
You're here to serve. That's what you're here to do. Okay. Now, boom, in verse 46, we've got Jesus doing what?
Making it a little
On the move again. So, which, again, if we believe that Mark uses these location markers as divisions, we have finished the major section and we're moving to something else because he's now given another location, and they are now close to what city? Jericho. Now, could be, allusions to Old Testament Jericho. Joshua, that's. Jesus is called a transliteration. It's a Greek pronunciation of a Hebrew word. And then the name is Joshua, because Joshua means Savior. Could it have something to do with Jericho? Maybe. I don't know. I don't think so, but it could. What it is Jericho is really close to Jerusalem. Jericho is really close to Jerusalem. So if Mark may only be saying that we are getting
closer,
we're getting really close. We're getting really close. So after going to Jericho, what do? After they go to Jericho, because they don't do much at Jericho. They just go to Jericho, and then the next verse, what are they doing?
They're leaving.
They're leaving Jericho. They went to Jericho, and now they're leaving Jericho. And and by the way, the other Gospels don't mention this, Jericho. Which is kind of interesting. Now, they're leaving, and it's disciples, and so the disciples are there, and who else is there? The crowd, the aklos. So we've got these two groups, that we've dealt with the whole time. We've got disciples and crowds, and they're leaving Jerusalem, they're leaving Jericho, and the next story, they're going to be doing what? And well, in the next, you're right. After the healing, they're going to be doing what? Entering Jerusalem. Palm Sunday. So we're coming in for our landing. So this is a little story before he enters Jerusalem. Now, as they are going, they encounter somebody. And who do they encounter? They encounter a blind man named Bartimaeus. And Bartimaeus is a beggar. So again, papyrus is too expensive to waste. If he includes a word, he's including it for a reason. So he's chosen to include beggar. So he wants us to know that it's not just a blind man, but a blind beggar. Now, by telling us he's a beggar,
he's the lowest.
He's low. Now, kind of interesting. in a little bit earlier in the section we looked at before, not today, but last week, he encountered somebody else who he identified. Mark chose to identify in a different financial situation. Who was that?
The rich man.
The rich man. So maybe file that away. We've got two guys Jesus is encountering near the ends of these sections. Both of them are identified kind of economically. And here Bartimaeus, we'll just file it away. At the very least, he's an outsider, right? And symbolically, he's blind. And good night, if we want to talk about symbolism, blindness would seem to be pretty important, right? Symbolically, what would blindness signify?
That he didn't know God.
Yeah, blindness could signify a lot of things. Physically blind, but also, spiritually blind, intellect. If we look at the story, who have been the ones that are truly blind?
The Pharisees.
The Pharisees. The Pharisees have been clueless because they're sightless. The Pharisees are blind. Here's a guy that is physically blind.
The Pharisees are blind by choice.
Right. But they're blind. Right.
Yes,
And
yes.
here's a guy who's physically blind, right? And little thing, he's beside the way, the udos, that which is the way, road, but the way, oh, well, gosh, that's kind of interesting that he chooses that word. And what happens to Bartimaeus?
He starts
As he
saying,
Well, even before that, what happens in verse 47?
Jesus of Nazareth.
He hears that Jesus of Nazareth is coming. That this guy is Jesus of Nazareth, which means what? Somebody must have told him.
Yeah.
Okay, so somebody told him, and as soon as somebody tells him, "Hey, that's Bartimaeus. That's Jesus over there. Jesus is on his way."
he wants a piece of
And yeah, in a sense, that's what he's doing. Yeah, because what does Bartimaeus start doing?
calling things.
He starts calling for him, and it's kind of interesting what he calls him. How does he call him?
Son of David.
Son of David. Now, you realize this is the first time in the Gospel of Mark Jesus has been called Son of David. Now, if we look at Matthew and Luke, they have birth stories and they have chronologies. And David is in all the chronologies. And David is involved in all the birth stories. So, that idea that he's son of David in Matthew and Luke have already been introduced. But it hadn't been introduced in Mark. This is the first time anybody is saying son of David. Not the last time, but the first time. Kind of anticipate something that we're going to talk about next week. But he says, calls him son of David, which is certainly a title. Seems appropriate because what is Jesus about to do?
A healing.
Well, about to heal him, but even more than, or specifically, what is Jesus right here as he's on the way? What is he about to do?
Oh, to go to his
He's about, and that's going to be where? He's about to enter Jerusalem. And who was it that entered Jerusalem? David, good. David entered Jerusalem. So,
Help you out there, you gotta have a heart attack.
yeah. I was gonna. Sounds like David. David entered Jerusalem. So it seems that's an appropriate title. That's something appropriate for Bartimaeus. Shows that he's aware of something that others may not be. But he's entering the city of David. He's entering David's city, and of course, because we have seen that. This irritates me. The blind man is shouting, "Son of David, have mercy on me. Have mercy on me."
they
And
say,
what do they do?
Quiet, shut up,
Shut
don't
your
bother
mouth.
me.
Yeah.
Shut up. Shut up.
Then they gave him some fish and bread. No,
Yeah.
I'm only kidding.
They would have been happy with that. Have we encountered this before? I bet we have. I bet we've encountered it in all three of these little sections in the second part of Mark. We encountered it with Syrophoenician woman. We encountered it with children. Now we encounter it with Bartimaeus. Man, what are these people thinking? What are they thinking? Patty, do you know what they're thinking? I don't know either.
But as a reader, we can read ahead, and they're living it at times.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah, but we don't feel a whole lot of sympathy for them.
No.
No, because we know we know the end of the story. So, yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. But the more they try to get this guy to shut up, what does he do?
The louder
He cries louder, same thing, Son of David, have mercy on me. Okay, which, interestingly enough, is reflected in the other story. Because they tried to shut the Syrophoenician woman up, and she kept coming. They tried to stop them from bringing children, but the children kept coming. Now they're trying to shut Bartimaeus up, and he keeps coming, shouting. And what does Jesus do?
Call him.
Okay, he called, and it's interesting, when he says call him, now that's, in grammar, that's an imperative. So Jesus is giving, not permission, a command. Jesus is giving a command. You know, he isn't saying, well, if he wants to come, come. Or don't stop him from coming. Even that would be a command. But, you know, he gives them a command. You know, call him. Yeah, which kind of becomes interesting, again, to Mark's audience. Because the message of Jesus is being communicated through someone else. Kind of like what you do in the church when you communicate the message of Jesus through somebody else. I mean, Jesus doesn't show up and tell us, right? How do we hear about the word?
Somebody had to tell us.
People tell us. Okay, so anyway, they call the blind man. It's interesting, they call him, and he comes, and they say, have courage, get up, and go, you know, kind of get up, he's calling you. And what does Bartimaeus do?
He goes.
He jumps up, he goes. And when he throws off his garment, jumps up, goes to Jesus, what is being kind of conveyed? Jumping up, what's that? Immediately, yeah, there's a speed here.
I was waiting for that
Yeah,
one part today.
well, you already got it
I
once.
say immediately,
Yeah.
she stole that part.
And he asked, what does Jesus ask Bartimaeus?
What do you want?
What do you want? And Bartimaeus says,
I want to be seen
I want to see again, but he calls him rabbi.
immediately. He wants to see
Yeah,
immediately.
yeah. He calls him rabbi, which means Bartimaeus doesn't know, doesn't understand, but Bartimaeus does what?
He follows him.
He trusts that Jesus can do it, right? Because that's what he's asking. He trusts that Jesus can do it, that he can heal it. And what does Jesus say? Goodbye.
Bye.
No, that's not what he said.
Well, what does Jesus say?
He didn't say goodbye.
That's right. That would be bad if he said goodbye.
He tells him to follow him.
Yeah, well, he says to him, go, your faith has saved you.
Yeah.
Now, that becomes kind of significant because what did he say to, he says, your faith has saved you. What did he say to the rich man? The other guy we talked about? He said, go to the rich man, right? He says, go to Bartimaeus, right? You know, go, your faith has saved you. He says to the rich man, same thing, he says, go. But he says to the rich man, what? Go and sell everything you have. Give the money to the poor and follow me. What does Bartimaeus do? What happens to Bartimaeus?
He can see.
He can see, and then what does he do?
He follows
He
Jesus.
follows.
Immediately.
Immediately.
Mm-hmm.
The rich man, Jesus says go, and what does the rich man do?
Yeah.
He leaves. He leaves. Interesting contrast between Bartimaeus and the rich man. Okay, so where are we in the story of Mark? Where are we in the story of Mark? What can we say about Jesus? What can we say about these groups that we've been following? Where are we in the story? Because we're getting close to the climax.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Riding into Jerusalem.
Yeah, he's about to go into Jerusalem. So
So we're there.
we're almost there. What can we say about the story, at least in the second half so far? What do we know about the Son of Man? What do we know about Son of Man? The Son of Man is going to what?
He's going to die.
He's going to suffer and die. He's going to suffer and die. And then be raised again. We know that. What do we know? We haven't encountered Pharisees and scribes much. We've encountered them a couple of times, but not much. And they were jerks when we encountered them. You know, so they have, in our opinion of them, hasn't changed. What about the disciples? how's our opinion? What have we learned about the disciples in this second half so far? In these last, 3 chapters? What have we learned about the group closest to Jesus?
They really haven't been around. Okay?
Yeah, well, the disciples.
Yeah, they're sort of in the background here.
Yeah, and
Where they should be out front.
okay. And why are they in the background? What's wrong? What's happened with these guys? Would you say, I would like my son to grow up just like James?
Yeah.
Would you say that?
No.
No. John? Just like John?
They're disappointed.
They're disappointing. The disciples have been disappointing, right? All of them. Even Peter's been disappointed. Rebuking Jesus. Give me a break. Rebuking Jesus, really? The disciples have kind of been a disappointment. We had high expectations, but they aren't meeting them.
Yeah, back in the beginning, whenever they were chosen, there was Jesus and then the disciples. Now it's Jesus alone.
Yes. Oh, well, but we still have another group. I think you're right. When he says to James, Andrew and Peter, James and John, follow me, immediately they follow. Says to the tax collector, follow me, boom, immediately he follows. Right?
Right.
And we say, whoa.
Good listeners.
Good listeners. And now we're saying, yeah, they may be good listeners, but they don't hear much. They don't hear much because Jesus has been kind of consistent in what he's been saying, and they don't seem to get it. They don't seem to get it very well. So our opinion of the disciples has slidden a little bit. What about the crowds? What about the crowds?
The crowds have always been there. They're listening to the scribes and Pharisees.
Well, they're there though, and we don't know about if you're looking at the crowds, we've still got a great big
Question mark.
because I don't know about the crowds. They're there, they're hanging around. At least they haven't fought over who's most important. They haven't been rebuking Jesus.
Yeah, they've done a better job than what
They seem to do a better job than the disciples. And the disciples get the private lesson. We don't know about the crowds yet. So as Jesus enters Jerusalem, we know about the scribes and the Pharisees. We're not impressed with the 12. And the crowds, they're still kind of a mystery. But they won't be a mystery for long. The crowds won't be a mystery for long. Because the crowds are going to end up taking a stand. Okay. Any questions about what we've talked about after Peter's confession at Caesarea Philippi, either today or the last couple of weeks? Like I said, I think those are 3 distinct sections that they all have an internal structure that mirror one another. Oh, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. Okay. Next week we're going to go into chapter 11. We're going to look at verses 1 through 33. 1 through 33. And now we're going to come in for we're coming in for a landing. Because he's going to enter Jerusalem and do some teaching. And then not so good things are going to happen. So we're going to be doing that. All right. Let's have a word of prayer. Lord God, thank you so much for giving us this time together, and bless us as we go about whatever we're going to be doing. Remind us, though, that to keep our focus on you. Also remind us that glory really comes through service. That's your intention. So help us to be willing to be servants. Now, we're not going to be perfect because we're not perfect people. But help us to look at that as part of our call, our opportunity to be your followers. Help us to serve others. In the name of Christ we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.